Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday, the 12th of November in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, you're hired. Donald Trump is expected to pick one-time rival Marco Rubio as his next Secretary of State as he turns to allies to fill top roles.
Bitcoin closes in on $90,000 as cryptocurrency bulls bet on a boom under the next president.
Plus, food for thought. We unwrap the story of a Nestle insider who's been tasked with fixing the $100 billion business.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Donald Trump is expected to name Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State, according to a person familiar with the matter. A one-time critic and rival, Senator Rubio would take on the top diplomatic role after transforming himself into one of the president-elect's most vocal supporters. Rubio has defended Trump's position to bring a swift end to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and taken an aggressive stance on China's emergence as an economic power. Bloomberg's Jill Deesis has more.
Rubio has been a pretty enormous China hawk over the last several years. He was actually sanctioned by Beijing over a couple of different matters, whether that be about the Hong Kong protests back in 2019. He also was very outspoken about the Xinjiang region in China and a lot of the U.S. allegations facing Beijing there. So, I mean, this is somebody that definitely China, I think, has bristled against quite a bit.
Jill Deesis also highlights that Rubio has been a staunch supporter of Israel's war in Gaza and its attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. His expected appointment to the top foreign policy job alongside other ardently pro-Israel lawmakers suggests that Trump will heighten support for Israel and increase pressure on Iran once he takes office.
Now, Republicans are close to gaining unified control of Washington under President-elect Donald Trump. In the House of Representatives, as of Monday night, Republicans have won 214 seats and Democrats have 205, with 218 needed for a majority. Republican incumbent Mike Garcia conceded defeat to Democrat George Whitesides, the former CEO of Virgin Galactic, in California's 27th congressional district election. This, according to a post on X. Other races are on the brink of adding to the Republican numbers, with Republicans assured of at least 216 seats in the House. Meanwhile, in the Senate, Democratic Representative Ruben Gallego defeated Republican Carrie Lake in the Arizona Senate race, according to the Associated Press.
Bitcoin is continuing its relentless surge higher, briefly climbing above $89,000 for the first time. The digital asset has now risen by more than 30% since the election. Bobby Lee is the founder and CEO of cryptocurrency firm Ballet and says that investors have high hopes that Donald Trump will deliver a friendlier regulatory environment.
From a policy perspective, we're anticipating a lot of crypto favorable policies in the United States. And the U.S., of course, leads the world in terms of regulation and policy in the financial markets. So, and there's no different for crypto.
Bobby Lee suggests there's appetite for the token to go even higher. According to data from the Deribit exchange, investors are lining up bets that Bitcoin will pass $100,000 as soon as the end of the year.
China is planning to cut taxes on home buying as its property market stagnates. Bloomberg has learnt that regulators are working on a policy to cut taxes on deeds from 3% down to 1%. JP Morgan Asset Management's Asia Pacific head of multi-asset solutions, Leon Goldfeld, says the government is attempting a huge rebalancing of the Chinese economy.
What China is basically having to reduce in size, like the property sector, infrastructure sector, are very big. What they're trying to grow is still relatively modest in size. So that rebalancing is multi-year, but and it may be 3 years, 5 years, but at the end of this, China is going to be a much stronger, much more productive economy.
JP Morgan Asset Management's Leon Goldfeld there. It highlights Beijing's concern about the sluggish domestic economy. Economists are calling, though, for more fiscal support to ensure China's roughly 5% economic growth target is met this year.
Climate negotiators are near creating the first ever global carbon market. Officials at the COP29 summit in Azerbaijan hope the UN-run initiative will allow countries to trade emissions allowances. It comes as doubts loom over the two-week climate convention, even the US's own envoy saying a Trump presidency will put green action on the back burner. ExxonMobil CEO Darren Woods told Bloomberg at the summit that appetite for fossil fuels has never been higher.
Demand is at record highs, both for oil and for gasoline and diesel. And so the demand is out there today. The industry's been very effective at supplying that demand. I think that's what you're seeing. And fortunately for us, with some of the turmoil in the Middle East, that available supply has kept the markets fairly stable. And so it's less of a demand issue, and there's just a lot of supply.
That's ExxonMobil's CEO Darren Woods there. Many international targets pegged to 2030 deadlines are already in severe jeopardy.
A surge of British companies are giving up rather than dealing with the consequences of the recent budget. More than 1,000 companies filed insolvency papers in the week after the Chancellor announced tax increases. That's a 64% increase, or 64% higher than the same week in the previous year. UK Hospitality's CEO Kate Nichols says that many businesses in her industry were caught off guard by the changes.
While many of us would have been able to forecast that the Chancellor was going to look at employer NIC rate and factor that in, the real unexpected economic shock in the budget was that threshold at which it was applied was going to be halved. That's a real hit to the bottom line. And let's not forget, around a third of our businesses, particularly small independents, still operating at or below break even because they haven't recovered from COVID.
UK Hospitality CEO Kate Nichols there. Well, the surge in businesses being shut is a potential headache for the Chancellor ahead of her annual speech to the financial sector at Mansion House later this week.
The UK is planning to issue gilts on a blockchain within the next 2 years. Bloomberg has learned the Labour government wants to use the technology that underpins Bitcoin to tokenise its government debt. While such transactions remain niche, the hope is that it will make gilt trading faster and cheaper. The Treasury declined to comment.
And those are your top stories this morning. In terms of the markets then, well, on Monday we saw the US S&P 500 close up 0.1% to another record high. Tesla extending a rally up another 9%. So the Trump trades really extending, with Bitcoin also rallying 10% and the dollar closing up 0.5%. Also, you saw a lift to the Russell 2000 small caps in the US. As of trading this morning, the Hang Seng index is down by 2.9% this morning. So you've got a big slide in Asian equities, the dollar hitting a fresh 1-year high, oil continuing to decline down 0.3% for Brent crude futures, and treasuries reopening lower in price after the holiday that we had yesterday for Veterans Day. So 10-year yields rising 2 basis points. Those are the markets.
In a moment, we'll bring you the latest political news from the US, plus tell you about the challenges facing the boss of Nestle as he faces investors at an upcoming Capital Markets Day. But another story that caught our eye this morning. Did you know that you can't currently buy a new Jaguar in the UK?
Really? I've seen them on the road.
I went
What's
shopping
going on?
at the weekend. I didn't. Well, I mean, kind of, basically. The brand is going dormant until 2026 as it undergoes a transition to electric cars. So until then, Jaguar Land Rover won't ship any new models to UK dealers. Now, there are still Jags available on the forecourts already, but they're now being classified as pre-owned, even if they haven't actually been out on the roads or had an owner. So this means that it'll be the first time actually since World War II that Brits won't be able to buy any new Jags for a while. I'm sure that many people out there devastated at that prospect. The new models, though, we'll get a sneak peek of them on the 2nd of December at Miami Art Week, where they're going to unveil some of their new models, but they won't actually be on sale until 2026.
Sort of a hint that it's all going to be about design. Yeah, very interesting. Right, the main story today, of course, the additional picks that Donald Trump has begun to make for really quite key roles. So we were talking earlier about Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, but there has also been discussion around head of the EPA over in the US. That's the Environmental Protection Agency. And you've also had out just the latest one for Homeland Security, at least at the moment, CNN talking about Kristi Neon being picked there. So very, very rapidly, after just a few days, And 10 weeks before the president actually enters the White House, we already have actually a lineup of a lot of the top cabinet roles for Trump.
Our breaking news managing editor Derek Wallbank is with us for more. Derek, talk us through then these latest appointments. What do they tell us about the direction of policy under Trump?
Well, look, I think that Marco Rubio and Waltz are both very significant appointments, especially if you're looking in a kind of U.S.-China context, right? Marco Rubio is an incredibly stiff China hawk, to the point that he has been sanctioned by China, and the idea of him coming to the State Department raises literal operational questions about how China is going to deal with him in a mechanical sense because he has been sanctioned, and what ways they could, what they might have to do in order to simply go about the normal processes of diplomacy. So Donald Trump here is, in some of his very first national security picks, signaling quite a tough line as it comes to China. The other thing that I would focus on here is that Donald Trump has made absolutely no secret whatsoever about how he feels about Israel, and the picks from a national security perspective have got all a very common through line of a very, very, very pro-Israel stance. And so these are two things that I think, as you see this foreign policy team shaping up for the president-elect, you really do see tough on China, and you really do see incredibly friendly to Israel and indeed the incumbent Netanyahu government as through lines throughout all of these selections.
Okay, yes, I think that's very interesting, those points on China and the Middle East. Meanwhile, Trump allies have also been talking a lot about changes that they're planning to make at various government agencies, and we've had a number of other appointments, for example, to the Environmental Protection Agency and the Borders are. In terms of what we understand about those changes at government agencies, what do we actually know?
Well, look, we have seen I think there was a lot of speculation and campaigning running up to this about what exactly Republicans plan to do with, let's call it, the broad regulatory state. And one of the things that we're seeing, again, as a through line across a lot of the domestic picks is a real desire to reshape some of the agencies that are seen as, let's say, operating in more kind of traditionally democratic spaces. I'm thinking about regulatory agencies and things of that nature. We have seen markets take bets that there's going to be a lot more of a focus towards deregulation. That probably is a reasonably sensible bet. Lee Zeldin at EPA is a great example of this. He's somebody who has pushed for a little bit of a lighter touch in terms of a regulatory environment. At the same time, we've seen some comments from Trump and from others about sweeping changes that they're looking to make in terms of the Department of Education, in terms of education funding, in terms of things that they want universities to do and not do. And so I would expect overall, maybe on balance, a slightly lighter regulatory touch, but there may be some examples, and universities would be one of them, where you might actually see increased regulation or increased sort of state touch towards those actors trying to achieve certain outcomes.
We are also looking at the final race in the Senate being called, the Democrats holding the seat in Arizona. Of course, the Republicans do have the majority in the House, 53-47. Still got counting underway in a number of House races, more than a dozen of them, in fact. The Republicans currently just 4 seats away from majority.
Yes, that's right. And look, let me take them in the order that you presented them. The Senate here is going to finalize at 53-47, although maybe only just for a brief while. As we mentioned, Marco Rubio is expected to be the Secretary of State nominee, and so that would take Republicans' margins down ever briefly. The 53-47 is an interesting number. It's enough that people who are moderates like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are not your majority makers on the votes, so you don't necessarily have to stay within the bounds of what they find acceptable. But at the same point, it's not so many that you can just sort of roughshod everything that you want to do. There is a filibuster. You do need to find a way to get to 60 votes on a lot of different legislative items. So that may mean that President Trump, while he should have a pretty fair hand legislatively outside of taxes, might need a little bit of help from Democrats. On the House side, you are looking at a paper-thin majority, no matter how much it shapes up. It looks at this point like Republicans are going to hold the House. My guess right now, if I were counting it up, would be somewhere around 222 seats. The majority is at 218. So that's not too much of a distance. And we're already starting to see, at least Stefanik to the United Nations is one of the positions that Trump has offered. So you're seeing him start to pull out of some of his House members, narrowing that majority. There really will be, and I got to make 2 points real quick here. They're very, very important. One, the Republican House has struggled to pass some very basic things over the last 2 years. And Trump at the top should help with cohesion, but that's going to be a problem. And two, the House has so many members in it, right? 435 voting members, that a lot of the thing that you do have to worry about is people getting sick or taking another job or something like that. The full House is very rarely actually full, and the majority will hang by very thin threads at the very start. So if they want to do something, emphasis on going now and big emphasis on the president himself being able to keep his own coalition fully in line.
Okay, Derek, thanks very much for joining us. That's our managing editor for Breaking News, Derek Wallbank. I want to turn to a story around Nestle, and the new boss of the consumer goods giant is going to face a key challenge at its Capital Markets Day next week. Laurent Frexe, who's a company veteran, was appointed in August to replace Mark Schneider after disappointing sales and a loss of investor confidence that's seen the company's shares fall almost 40% since their peak in 2022. Our European consumer goods reporter Dasha Afanasieva has been writing about this, and she joins us now. Dasha, good morning. What's been going wrong, first of all, for Nestle?
It's the growth. It's about the top line sales growth. They had 5 quarters of missed estimates, and they've had to downgrade their outlook for this year. And fundamentally, the issue is that, like a lot of consumer goods companies, they enjoyed a very high growth driven by high inflation, whilst volumes contracted, and they haven't been able to get that growth back. Consumers have switched to supermarket own labels, and branded goods companies have struggled to persuade them that no, you should pay that little bit more.
In terms of the former CEO Mark Schneider, his departure, was that a surprise? I mean, if you put that kind of quite a difficult economic backdrop in focus, was it surprising that he left?
It was really surprising to both investors and the media, I'd say. It was the shock announcement on a Thursday evening. I think he didn't have much time from the time that he was told he was out to the announcement. And I think it shows that they acted really quickly. They acted quickly from the perspective of companies acting too slow. But as I say, there had been a few quarters of sluggish growth. And on top of that, I think if it just been growth, maybe it would have been easier to turn around. But there'd been these really unfortunate mishaps like IT issues, supply chain constraints, which all came after the pandemic. Nestle actually weathered those supply chain challenges very well, and then it all kind of came undone in the last couple of years.
Well, talk to us then about the new guy, Laurent Frexe. Is he a different breed of boss?
The biggest difference that's obvious is that he's been at Nestle for 38 years. Mark Schneider had been a Fresenius. He was an outside hire, the second only ever for Nestle in its 150-year history. The last one before that in the 20s.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.